to this week's guest in a minute. But first, join our community by hitting the subscribe button and the bell so as soon as we post a new guest, you get it right away. And don't forget to hit the like and share buttons because that helps us grow the show. So welcome. Hit the subscribe button and let's get to this week's guest. Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Retta. You know, I've spent over 4 decades working in the game, fortunate enough to meet some of the great legends of the game, saw them come into the game, watch them shine, and now they've moved on to life after hockey. 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast gives us a chance to catch up, tell some great stories, find out what some of these guys are doing today. Today, a 13-year NHL veteran, one of the greatest Toronto Maple Leafs of all time, the first Toronto Maple Leaf to score 50 in a season, and he did it not once, but 3 times. He has also held the Leafs franchise record for most goals in a season over 40 years until Auston Matthews passed him in the 2022 seasons. Of course, we're talking about the pride of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, Ricky Vaive. Ricky, welcome, buddy. Great to catch up with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be on, and it's a beautiful day here in Niagara Falls. Not quite as crazy as it was yesterday, but
the eclipse. Hey, listen, man, you look fantastic. Are you getting ready for the golf season or what?
Oh, I can't wait. I love golf. I play 6 days a week, and it's fun because I walk, so I get a little exercise and keep my body in decent shape, and keep all the heart and everything good. So I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait.
Awesome. There's some interesting parallels. Like your name keeps coming up now as we watch Auston Matthews do what he does. Your name keeps coming up because, you know, there are all kinds of things that are being compared to what you're able to do and what Auston Matthews has been able to do. Much like he made the immediate impact when he stepped into the NHL, you also did. You were actually drafted by the Vancouver Canucks. People may not remember this, and there's the WHA story. We'll get into that a little later on. But you became a Maple Leaf midway through your first NHL season, and then right away you became the first Leaf to score 50. As a guy who understood the historic nature of the Toronto Maple Leafs organization, what was that like for you as a kid stepping into the league and making that kind of impact that quickly?
Well, I mean, first of all, I had no idea that nobody in Maple Leaf history had ever scored 50 goals. I mean, I just assumed that, you know, with all the great players that played in Toronto over the years, that someone must have done it at some point. So when I got close to the 50 and they started talking about it, I was kind of surprised. I didn't realize that I could be the first guy ever. And so lo and behold, that wonderful night, March 24th, 1982, Billy Derlego made a beautiful backhand pass across, and boom, it was in the net, past Mike Mute, and there it was. And when, you know, history was made.
Where's that puck today?
That puck is down in my basement, actually.
Ricky, you got to put that in a vault or something.
Well, no. You're probably right, but what the hell? No, I don't think anybody's going to break in and steal it.
Listen, and the fact that it wasn't just a one-off was amazing. We've seen guys before have big career years and then just never the same again. But you came off your 54 with a 51, another 52. So not only were you the first guy to do it, you did it in 3 consecutive years, which is mind-boggling. What happened to your life personally from a guy who had been playing the WHA and then a brief cup of coffee with the Vancouver Canucks, come into one of the biggest hockey markets in the world and become the most recognizable player in the organization for decades? What was that like in terms of a transition for you personally?
You know, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was difficult at times because, I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. I mean, everybody knew who you were and that sort of thing. Although we didn't have the social media back then that is out there now, but still there was the newspapers. There was we didn't have TSN or Sportsnet or any of things like that back then. So yeah, you could go around a little bit more freely, but if you walked around anywhere in Toronto in a mall or anything, everybody knew who you were. So there was people coming up to you and talking to you and everything. So it was kind of strange at first, coming from PEI especially, but um, you know what? I looked at it as it came with the job and the job that I was doing, and because of what I was doing, it was just part of the job.
You spent a lot of time around the Leafs organization today. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a Leaf game and I spot you there in the alumni box or handing out a jersey to on military night to one of the great members of our Canadian military, and the ovations you get are crazy there. How much opportunity do you get to talk to players of today to kind of communicate the responsibility that comes with wearing the blue and white, and how you handle everything that comes with it? Which, I mean, we just even recently we heard Mitch Marner talk about the fact that this town, this area, the fans, the media can be really, really hard on the players when things aren't going well. How do you communicate how to handle that with them?
Well, I don't get that much of an opportunity to talk to the current players. I mean, I see them at the golf tournament in September, which I saw Auston there, and I was talking to him for quite a while and asked him how his summer was and everything. And he said it was great. He said, I trained really hard. I'm ready to go. I said, well, you may as well get 65 or 70 because that'll be around for 100 years, not 40. And I said, are you ready? And he goes, yeah, absolutely, I am. And then I saw him again in February at the blue and white at the Royal York. And I said, I went up and I was talking to him. I said, well, boy, you weren't kidding, were you? So we had a good chuckle out of that. And but you know what? I mean, the big thing for me is playing in a place like Toronto. I'm sure it's probably the same in Montreal, maybe all Canadian cities, but I mean, you got to be able to let things roll off your back. When you hear or read something negative about yourself or your teammates or something like that, uh, if you can't let it roll off your back in a place like Toronto, you can't perform here. It's pretty simple. You have to kind of let things roll off your back and kind of put them out of the way, or else you're not going to be able to survive in a place like Toronto. I'm sure it's probably the exact same in Montreal as well.
You had something else thrust upon you. Not only were you a goal scorer with incredible expectations, and then you delivered that way, you were also given the C, the captaincy of the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. You were just 22 years old, and it came in a rather unusual fashion. It wasn't the team voting. It wasn't the coach saying, this is my guy. Why don't you explain to our audience how that happened and how it all unfolded, how Rick Vaive became captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs at just 22 years old?
Well, it was bizarre, to be quite honest with you. It was right after Daryl had been traded to Philadelphia, and Harold Ballard came up to me and he poked me in the chest and he said, "You're our captain." And I'm standing there. I'm 22 years old. I'm looking at him. I'm going, "Oh God!" I mean, like, what am I going to say? Yes, no. If I say no, I know he's going to trade my ass out of here, and I don't want to get traded. So I said yes. Now, fortunately, I had Börje Salming sitting right beside me in the dressing room for 7 years. And whenever I said anything, if any of the older guys stepped up and said anything, Börje was the first guy to stand up and say, "Hey, he is our captain. You listen to him." And so fortunately for me, I had Börje there to help me, because at 22 years old, that's not an easy job to take on.
Yeah. When Börje came back just before his passing, his tragic passing of ALS, not so long ago, there was some very emotional moments between yourself and him and some of your former teammates. Maybe talk to our audience about the importance of your relationship with Börje and what that actually meant to you.
Well, it meant everything. Yeah, not just in the room, but socially. Like, we went to his place a lot and different functions and stuff that we would be together at. I wasn't at the game when he came over here, but I watched it on TV and it was very emotional. But then we went over to Sweden I believe it was that February,
Yeah.
for a game for his foundation.
Yeah.
And they were putting his banner up in the rink where him and his brother both played before he came over to Toronto. And this guy was singing a song, which was a rather sad song. And I couldn't help it, but I was bawling. I was
Yeah.
standing on the blue line crying like a baby. And like I said, I can't remember the last time that happened that I cried like that, but it was so emotional. It was a wonderful trip. It was unbelievable, but at the same time, it was very, very emotional. And I got to see his daughter and son that I hadn't seen since they were kids, and now they're married and they have their own kids and everything. So that was kind of nice to go over there and get to see them and that sort of thing. But it was a wonderful trip, but at the same time, very emotional.
Yeah, very emotional. And something I find very interesting is I've been really, really lucky to have some amazing guests on this podcast. Many, many Hall of Famers, some of the greatest players of all time have joined us in this conversation. And they always talk about the relationships and how that's the single biggest thing they miss. And I mean, you're sharing your story about Salming is really just a point, but there's so many others that would speak about you the same way, that things that Ricky Vaive did for me to help me make my transition into the NHL, to help me make that adjustment. A while back, I don't remember what year it was, but you wrote a book called Catch 22, appropriately titled My Battle
Yeah.
in Hockey and Life. Why was it so important for you to get that book out there to tell your story?
I think the biggest thing, was like I keep seeing fans of, the big four sports, football, baseball, hockey, and everybody thinks that, oh, this guy's got a great life. Everything must have been great growing up as a kid. And, but they don't realize how many, players, like say in baseball, football, even hockey, that grew up in poor neighborhoods or whatever and had to, work their way out of there, get a scholarship in university or whatever, and then, transform that into a career as a professional in baseball, football, hockey, whatever it might be. My situation was no different. And I wanted people to realize that it's not all roses growing up and, wherever you grow up and getting to the National Hockey League is, it's not an easy path. It's not something that's handed to you. It's something that you have to earn. And you go through trials and tribulations along the way. And I wanted people to realize that, everything is not perfect. There are bumps in the road, and you have to overcome those bumps and bruises and whatever to get there.
But not only do you have to overcome them, you've got to overcome them in the spotlight. I mean,
Yeah,
we all celebrate, and rightfully so. I mean, you scored number 50, the town went crazy. Everybody's excited. You're on the
yeah,
front pages of the newspaper. You're in the highlight packs. Back in those days, I was working for Sportsline, a local, television show back in those years. And it was huge for us, which is great that you're in that spotlight, but you're also in the spotlight, to your point, when things don't go well.
right.
Which brings us back to, after being the captain of the Leafs for 5 years, in February of '86, Harold Ballard, as he gave you the C, stripped the C from you in kind of a I don't know, overreaction maybe. tell our friends what happened with that.
Well, we were in Minnesota, and John Anderson was my roommate in Toronto, and he had been traded to Quebec. And they were playing in Minnesota on a Thursday night. We were playing in Minnesota Saturday. And so for some reason, Dan Maloney had practice at 7 a.m. on Friday. But I went out with John. I was home at, 12:30, 1 o'clock. But we went to the bar. We had quite a bit to drink. And so Greg Terrian was my roommate. He woke me up. He said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I'm sitting on the side of the bed. Greg leaves the room to go over to the rink, and I laid my head on the pillow and I fell back to sleep. The next thing I know, Dan Maloney is walking into my room and going crazy. And I think it was an overreaction, to be quite honest with you. I mean, for something like that, I mean, I think if I had been the coach in that situation, I would have told the press that I was sick and I was back at the hotel room. Then I would have came back and I would have said, listen, I had your back this time, but if something like this happens again, I'm not going to have it next time, but he didn't do that. And then the next thing, Jerry McNamara got involved, Harold got involved, and then it was gone. And I thought it was an overreaction. I thought I guess the punishment didn't fit the crime, I guess, is the way I would put it.
And sadly, it was the end, pretty much the beginning of a great run as a Toronto Maple Leaf. I mean, you also played for the Hawks, you played for the Sabres, you played for the Canucks, but people remember you first and foremost, obviously, with the Toronto Maple Leafs. You had an opportunity to play with some great Leafs. You also played with some other great stars around the league. Getting moved around, you got to play with some other guys. After spending a year and a half, you were dealt with to the Hawks, spent a year and a half then. Then you were traded in 1988 to the Buffalo Sabres, where you got to see, we're talking about Alexander McGillney a lot now because he's one of the last guys to score 70, and people are wondering not in the Hall of Fame. You got to see this guy perform firsthand right there. Mm-hmm. Tell our audience about your experiences with Alexander McGillney, what your memories are of him.
Well, it's kind of funny because I don't really like flying. And my first thing with Alex was,
so glad you're telling this story because I didn't even have to you for it.
He was worse than I was. He hated flying worse than I did. So I sat with him all the time because it made me feel better. I knew that he was more scared than I was. And so I always sat with him, but a wonderful, wonderful player. I mean, this guy he could do things. I've always said, I can't believe he's not in the Hall of Fame. I mean, this was the first year that his name actually came up for the Hall of Fame. He didn't get in. And then there's another guy that I played with in Chicago, Steve Larmer, who I can't believe is not, his name doesn't even get mentioned for the Hall of Fame, let alone get in, which I can't believe he's not in there. But McGillney, I mean, this guy could do things at full speed that other guys couldn't do back in those days. And I mean, you can just imagine he defected when I think the World Juniors was in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken. Alaska. And Börje and I forget who the other guy was, played in Detroit, was his centerman. Could you imagine those three guys playing in the NHL as a line?
I know.
I mean, the talent that McGillney had was outrageous. It was unbelievable, and he was really fun to play with. I didn't get to really play with him on the same line that often, but we had a good team in Buffalo there for a while. Rick Dudley was our coach. He was a good coach, well prepared. He had us ready all the time, and but McGillney was unbelievable. And for the life of me, I still can't believe he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of time. I honestly do. I think we had a few years there where there were a lot of first-time ballot guys going in, a lot of slam dunk guys going in, and then there's going to be a couple of years where you're okay. Who we missed for a couple of years? Who do we need to bring in? And I agree with you. I think it's only a matter of time till McGillney gets in the Hall. After you spent some time with the Buffalo Sabres, and we weren't okay at that time. In 1992, you had a chance to catch on with the Ottawa Senators when the NHL expanded in the fall of 1992. Now, you were a kid in PEI, but you're actually born in Ottawa. And it came close to, well, why don't you tell us a story about the Ottawa Senators?
Well, my last year in Buffalo, I didn't play much. John Muckler came in and took over, fired Dudley, took over as coach. So I spent probably 2.5, 3 months in the press box. And so I wanted, I wanted to continue to play when Tampa and Ottawa were coming in next year. So I went to Jerry Meehan, who was still the general manager. And I said, listen, if you can't move me at the deadline or put me on waivers, send me to Rochester. I need to play. So I went to Rochester at the deadline, finished up there. Hockey became fun again because, I wasn't playing in Buffalo, and finally I got to play again, and I had great teammates there. We went to the semifinals, and it was fun. And so anyway, I left that summer. I left probably 10, 12 messages with Mel Bridgman in Ottawa, the general manager, and Phil Esposito in Tampa. Never heard back from either one of them. So Dale Howard-Chuck was my neighbor in Buffalo, and he was still there. And I knew he had a connection to John Ferguson, Sr., who had a role in Ottawa. I think he was player development or something. So I asked Dale if he would call John and have him call me. So John calls me, and I said, John, I'd like to continue playing in Ottawa. I said, I was born in Ottawa. I said, you're getting a player that everybody knows already. And I said, I'll play for the minimum salary, which at that time was $120,000. And I said, we can work on the contract and any bonuses or anything after the fact. And he goes, you'd play for that much? I said, absolutely. I said, I want to keep playing. I said, I think I still got 3 or 4 good years left in me. And anyway, he said, okay, great. I mean, so he called me back 3 or 4 days later. He had already talked to Bridgman. He said, no, that idiot doesn't want to sign it. And then they brought in Peluso from Chicago for $350,000.
Yeah.
And I was willing to play for 120. And so anyway, so that was pretty much the end. And then I get into coaching after that. So that was kind of nice that I was able to fall into a coaching job right away. And I love coaching, and, I don't mind saying that I was pretty good at it.
You were pretty good at it. And I want to ask you about your coaching days in the minors and also in junior in a sec. But first, I kind of want to get back to, because the thing about you is there's a number of really interesting things that you did in your career, which is like, that was gutsy. That was a ballsy thing. One of the things you did was when you were playing junior in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League back then for Sherbrooke, you had 127 goals, 265 points in 136 games. Numbers that were absolutely crazy. Crazy. So people were all anticipating, what's this guy going to do in the draft? Where is he going to go? Yada, yada, yada. And in the midst of all that, you say, actually, I'm going to go to the WHA, this fledgling league that people have never heard of. How did that end up happening? How did you end up playing for the Birmingham Bulls rather than going into the NHL draft?
Well, first of all, the NHL draft was 20 years old at the time, and I was only 19. It was my last year.
You actually waived on your year, though, when you ended up in Birmingham. You sat back for an extra year because you didn't want to play in the NHL. You wanted to go to the WHA at that point.
Well, no, you couldn't go to the NHL.
No, you waited. I'm saying you held back. Like, you made it clear to everybody you were going to the WHA.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I looked at my, the team that we had in Sherbrooke, and, most of our best players were gone. And I had the opportunity to go to Birmingham, and I thought, what's the best thing for me? And I said, okay, the best thing for me is to go to the WHA and play against men, play against pros, and get better. And the general manager in Sherbrooke, this is insane, like, offered me unbelievable money under the table to stay and play my last year's junior. And I'm not going to go into details about how much it was or anything, but it was a lot more than what I was making in Birmingham. And he called me, and I said, look, it's not about the money. I said, it's about me going to a place where I'm going to play against pros, play against men, and get better. And that was all that I was concerned with. I wasn't, about, breaking records in junior or anything like that. And so I did it. And you know what? I don't regret it one bit.
You played with some great guys. You played with Michel Goulet, Craig Hartsburg, Rob Ramage, Gaston Gingras, and you even played with Paul Henderson, who was 36 years old at that point. What was it like playing with Henny?
It was great. Henny was a great guy, and one of the older guys on the team. And Dave Hansen was on that team. Great guy. He was the only tough guy we had left, actually. The year before, Birmingham had about 5 or 6 tough guys. Bilodeau, Beaton, all these guys. They beat the heck out of everybody in the WHA. And then they were all gone. Now it was payback time. So now you got all of us young kids coming in, and it's payback time. And yeah, I got I got beat up quite a few times, but
You want to share the story? Please do share the story about your encounter with one of the great scrappers of all time, Dave Semenko, and how like, I know it wasn't your choice. It wasn't like you said, you know what, I want to go Semenko, but you brought it on yourself. So why don't you tell our audience what you did and how that unfolded?
Well, we were on a road trip in Edmonton, then Winnipeg the next night. Then we're coming back to Edmonton about 3 or 4 days later. And I remember we were facing off right beside Edmonton's bench. And I'm a right winger, so I'm right beside the boards. And Glenn Sather, who was the coach of the Oilers at the time, and he starts yapping at me. And I turn around and I say, hey, you don't have any equipment on, so keep your mouth shut. I said, you can't come out here and do anything. Anyway, it went on and on. It happened again later on in the game. And then he says, I'm going to send Semenko after you. And I go, whatever. I didn't say much. So Semenko comes out. I'm playing with him, against him, and he's a left winger. I'm a right winger. So I'm back checking on him, and the play goes offside. We turn, and he just suckers me. And then he grabs me right here by the back of my sweater, hits me a couple more times. So I'm already out first hit, the first punch. And I'm like this, and my gloves fall off. We get 5 minutes each for fighting. So anyway.
You got 5 for catching.
Yeah, exactly. And I was out for probably 40 minutes in the dressing room.
Seriously? It was that bad?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty bad. In fact, It was so bad I couldn't go to Winnipeg because I had 6 feet of cotton batting up both nostrils.
Wow.
And but I did play when we came back to Edmonton the next game. And of course, Sather kept yapping, and I just said, please shut up. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, this doesn't need to happen. And
speaking of the coaches, you actually played for one of the most interesting guys of all time, John Brophy.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was quite a character.
Yeah.
Although I love Brophy, I really did. I remember in Birmingham, he called me in. He goes, listen. He goes, I kind of already had it in me. It's kind of the way I played and approached the game anyway. But he called me into his office. He goes, look, we don't have all the tough guys anymore. We have one left, Dave Hansen. He can't fight everybody. So, you're going to have to stick up to yourself, or they're going to try and run you out of the league. Yeah. And I said, yeah, no problem. And I mean, yeah, I fought a lot. I mean, I led the league in penalty minutes, 248 penalty minutes. And but I did get beat up quite a bit. That was okay, because as long as you showed up and you let them know that, hey, I'm not going anywhere. You can do whatever you want to me, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm staying here in front of the net, wherever it is. And I think that really helped me a lot.
That's a tough way to make a living, though, Ricky. It's a tough way to make a living.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I've got a bad neck as it is, and but hey, it was all worth it. You get to play 13 years in the best league in the world. Yeah, the game was different back then. You took a lot of abuse. A lot of it wasn't called. I remember when I was in Buffalo, we played Montreal in the playoffs, and we went 6 games. So I always stood in front of the net in the power play. So I remember this one particular game. I'm in front of the net in the power play. I got Ludwig on this side. I got Chelios on this side. And the puck goes over here. Ludwig comes in. He's cross-checking me. Puck goes over here. Chelios comes in. He's cross-checking me. Patrick was in goal, whacking me with his goal stick. And I look at the referee in the corner, and he goes, no I'm thinking, oh, what do they got to do? Chop my arm off or my leg in order to get a penalty? Like, but I mean, you did what you needed to do in order to be successful and have, help the team win. And that was part of my job.
All right, so let me ask you this, because this has come up a lot recently with Matt Rempe. We were where we were with the Broad Street Bullies. We were still a very, very aggressive league during your entire career. At the end of your career, like you mentioned, coaches were coming to you and saying, Ricky, I need you to elevate this aspect of your game. It was a given. It was a huge part of the game. Then the league and everybody within it started to try to take that away from the game. And we went for a long time. I remember Brian Burke was not happy with the trend that we went, where all of a sudden he said, I can't even have a fighter on my fourth line anymore. There's no room for fighters in this league anymore. I hate this. I hate what we've done to our league. So it dissipated for a long time. We haven't eliminated fighting, but we made it so you really can't carry a fighter on your roster who can only fight. And now it's coming back with the Matt Rempes. And as Matt Rempe is coming in and making his mark and marking his territory, we see other guys now say, okay, Nick Laurier now, he says, oh, now I got to fight. I got an opportunity to stick. Matt Martin at the tail end of his career, as soon as Rempe stepped on the ice, I'll go the guy and show that I can still play in this league. Ryan Reeves in Toronto, he wasn't getting dressed for a lot of games. All of a sudden, now he's getting dressed on a regular basis. We're getting back to the point where there is a role for that sort of player. At least we are right now, short term. Here's my question to you. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about where we were probably over the last decade or so and where we could potentially go back to again now?
Well, I'll say this. I don't think the fighting is necessarily something that we need in the game. I mean, the odd fight here and there. I mean, I recall when like a guy like Jerome McKinley would fight with one of the other good players on the other team, and that would be like, okay, that's all right. Those guys are going at it, but they're scoring goals and they're, getting points and everything as well. They're some of the better players on the team. Now, it went kind of the complete opposite, where there was none of that. And I always thought, I think the game would be a little better if there was a little more physicality in the game. And, a little more hitting, a little more, like I always thought, put the red line back in. That was my biggest thing when they took the red line out. I thought, put the red line back in. Now the defenseman in the zone, they can't just fire it up to the far blue line and get it tipped in. They have to make a play. And there was a little bit less ice to play with. And I think, then you're going to have to see defensemen, even forwards, make plays and actually, play the game and make plays. And then now all of a sudden with Rempe coming in and all the fighting starting over again, I'm like, well, it's kind of crazy. I mean, because we haven't seen it for so long. It's been since what, 1980 or 2005, 2006, roughly, when all that kind of started to dissipate. And now all of a sudden we're seeing it again. I mean, I can't remember when I saw 5 guys on the ice all fighting the last time. That was probably when I was playing, and then all of a sudden, boom, it happens last week, and I'm like, holy cow, that's crazy. But I've always said that I wish there was more physicality in the game, and put the red line back in so people have to make plays in the game, and they can't just fire it up to the far blue line and have it tipped in, and so that was my feeling on it. I not necessarily the fighting. I'm not, I don't care about the fight. If there's a fight here and there, that's fine. I mean, it's never going to go out of the game. I don't think, and it's always been part of the National Hockey League. It probably always will be. Now, 5 guys fighting all at once is kind of something you haven't seen for a long, long time, and probably won't see very often. But fights are part of the game, and they're going to happen regardless, because of the nature of how fast the game is and how you know, how it's played. There's going to be guys that are going to be fighting.
I love your insights, brother. I love conversations. It's you and I usually when we get together, there's so much else going on. I don't get a chance to pick your brain. So I really enjoyed picking your brain. I want to do something before I say goodbye to you. And you've been really generous with your time. I want to play 5 fast facts. I'll throw some quick rapid fire questions at you and you give me the quickest answer that comes right back to mind. Okay. I promise nothing tough. You ready to play?
All right. I'm ready.
Here we go. It's time now for 5 fast facts with Toronto Maple Leaf legend Ricky Vaive. Rick, who's the best teammate that you ever played with?
Börje Salming.
Wow. And with that emotion when you were there with celebrating his life, that was amazing. Who was the best coach you ever played for?
Rick Dudley.
Which team? Oh, no, sorry. Who did you hate playing against the most and why? Tell me why you hated playing against this guy.
Brian Sutter. We never had a fight, but he was in our division. So he was a left winger. I was a right winger. I had to play against him every time we played St. Louis, which was usually about 8 or 9 times a year. And when you finished the game against Brian Sutter, you knew that you played a hockey game for 60 minutes because we never had a fight. But there was a lot of hacking, whacking, hooking, grabbing, punching. It was, I mean, he was a tough son of a bitch to play against. And when, like I said, when the game was over, you knew that you played 60 minutes against Brian Sutter.
And there's no greater compliment you could pay a player than to say you hated playing against them. What was your favorite NHL city to play in?
It's funny, but I think it was Long Island, only because I scored every time.
Never heard that one before, Ricky.
Well, it's only because I scored every time I played there.
Fair enough.
I don't know why, but it just seemed like I scored a goal every time I played in Long Island.
You scored a lot of goals in a lot of different cities. If you hadn't become an NHL player, what career do you think you would have had instead?
Wow. That's a tough one. I don't know. I probably would have been an accountant because math was my best subject in school. And I always loved numbers. And I think I probably would have ended up going to university and became an accountant.
Well, you put up some great numbers during your career, brother. I can tell you that. Thanks for giving me that great segue out of the back end of the show. Ricky, it's been a lot of fun, buddy. I love doing this. It's great hearing you tell some old stories, and I'm so glad you're looking so good. And it's sunny there. I want you to get outside and enjoy the golf course as soon as you can. Thanks a lot for this, brother.
All right, Gino. Thank you very much.
The first Leaf to score 50 in franchise history, one of the greatest Leafs of all time, Mr. Rick Vaive. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven and Athletes Care. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee, fresh 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven pizza and wings, a pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of bread from the 7 Now app, and Team 7-Eleven will have your order ready for pickup 24/7. Athletes Care is proud to be celebrating its 25th year, offering sports medicine services to both elite athletes and the general population who require rehab for a new or chronic injury or pain. Go to where the best go. Athletes Care Sports Medicine Clinics with 24 locations in the Greater Toronto Area and in Ottawa. If you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. As well, please check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel at O-Time Podcast. Until next time, I'm Gino Reda saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.